Hello, welcome to Podsongs. I'm Jack Stafford, and I interview inspiring people in service to others as inspiration for a new song. Today, I'm speaking with a New York Times best-selling author who wrote The Myth of the Rational Voter, Selfish Reasons to Have More Kids, The Case Against Education, and Open Borders, which is a graphic, non-fiction book that argues eloquently for open borders. He's a professor of economics at George Mason University, research fellow at the Mercatus Center, adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute, and former contributor to the Freakonomics blog. A busy guy, eh? He also publishes his own blog, EconLog. He still found time to talk to me. So let's give a big thank you to Bryan Caplan. Collaborating with other people. I've seen you worked with Zach Wienersmith. I'm sure you've given some thought as to what you would like a song about.
Right.
Because I've seen you've written about open borders and you've written about the myth of the rational voter, the case against education, selfish reasons to have more kids, and those are just the big ones. Those are the headliners. And you've written many academic papers and that. But I was hoping maybe some sort of exclusive, some sort of the next one in the pipeline, something like that.
I know. Have you thought about doing a song on Keyhole solutions?
Oh, there we go.
The chapter. Yeah, so I can see the refrain saying, and what if your complaint is this? Then the answer is that. What if your complaint is this thing? Then the answer is that thing. All right, so Keyhole solutions. So back in the dark old days of surgery, people performed medical procedures without worrying very much about collateral damage or whether there was some cheaper and more humane way of doing the surgery. But in the modern period, there is a strong philosophy of using keyhole surgery where you try to do the minimum amount of additional harm in the process of fixing whatever problem you're trying to fix. So the classic example is you just do a tiny incision just big enough for a key. That's why they call it keyhole surgery. You insert your special little camera. You see exactly what you need to do. You just do that little thing, snip out the little bad part, pull it out, and then stitch the person up. It's a tiny incision, and they get better really quickly. Now, economic journalist Tim Harford went and used this metaphor to say, well, we should also think about having keyhole solutions for policy. So rather than doing rather than hacking away at a social problem with an axe, just try to find what is the minimum intervention we can do in order to deal with this. So, for example, if you're worried about pollution, you could either write a phone book's worth of regulations, or you could say there's a tax on pollution and you can do whatever you want as long as you pay the tax.
Okay.
Or another example is rather than having government go and build public housing, you could just give someone a housing voucher. Here's some money you can spend on housing, spend it anywhere you want. That's the end of it. All right, now for immigration, there's this long list of complaints about immigration. And one thing I do in Open Borders is say the complaints are greatly overstated or just totally wrong. But then I have a chapter where I say, all right, well, look, suppose you're just not convinced by what I said. You're still worried about these problems after all the research I've gone over. Still, then there's the question, is there a cheaper, more humane way of dealing with this problem with immigration rather than keep them out and kick them out? Right, which is, of course, the default for almost all immigration complaints is don't let them in, and the ones that are here, let's hunt them down like animals and fling them out of the country. All right, so first problem, immigrants are causing poverty among natives through job market competition. Keyhole solution is to say, well, immigrants can come, but they either have to pay an admission fee or they have to pay a surtax, and then we use the revenue from the admission fees and surtaxes to help out natives that have lost due to competition from immigrants. So that's one keyhole solution. Another problem people talk about is immigrants going on welfare and taking advantage of the welfare state. There's an even simpler keyhole solution which says you can come, you can work, you can live here, but you can't collect benefits, or benefits are limited in some way. You have to pay taxes for 10 years before you can collect benefits, that kind of thing. Another complaint people have is cultural. The immigrants are messing up our culture. They don't speak our language. They don't understand what's going on. Again, Keyhole solution is fine. You can come after you pass a test of fluency or after you pass a test of cultural literacy. And then another complaint is that immigrants are going to come and mess up our politics. So there again, you could either say you have to wait to vote for a long time, or you have to pass a test of civic knowledge. And again, the idea is in all these cases, we still deal with the problem, but we deal with it in a way that doesn't have the same horrible harm of trapping someone in Haiti or Chad or wherever country that they are desperately fleeing from.
Oh, that's great, because I remember in your main argument in Open Borders was that it would generate trillions upon trillions of dollars.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
So take a tiny fraction of this amount of generated income and use it to solve the few problems.
Yeah, exactly. So instead of saying you can't come, saying you can come, but there's going to be some strings attached. And this way we can preserve almost all the gains while still calming the nerves of people that remain nervous about the negative effects of immigration.
But do you think they're more worried about they have broader prejudices that are not really about issues there?
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, honestly, it's true that when you argue about immigration, it's very common that people will just cycle through a bunch of complaints, and eventually the cycle just starts over again.
Yeah. This
definitely is what happens with my dad. So, yeah, it's the kind of thing where someone says, well, why don't we invite Jim to the party? He's like, no, Jim lives too far away. Well, actually, Jim lives close now. Well, the thing is that Jim wouldn't like it because we are serving Italian food. Well, like Jim actually ate before the party. Well, Jim wouldn't like it because his ex-girlfriend's there. Actually, they're going out again. He would love to be there with her. Well, let's see. Well, Jim can't come. And then finally, after 8 of these, like, you just don't like Jim, right? That's the real story. And you're just coming up with 8 different excuses. And especially if after talking about it for a while, you come back with, well, Jim lives too far away. Like, we already talked about this. It's like, and you just seem to be just cycling through complaints. So I think there is a lot to that many people just don't like immigrants. But at the same time, I would say that still the complaints, they're not totally insincere. People genuinely are worried on top of just having a general aversion. And I think a lot of it is just innumeracy, where you see one immigrant did one bad thing on the news and you say, well, that settles it. Mm-hmm. It's like, look, there's hundreds of millions of people in the EU. So how can one event settle anything? Yeah, doesn't make any. It's crazy.
Yeah, I was reading the book reviews because you have, you wrote about education, and you think that, education is a waste of money. And you think that would stir people up a bit, but no, they were most people were agreeing with you. But then about immigration, more of a hornet's nest, isn't it?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, the thing about the education is, the education book is the one that if I give it to a totally normal audience of average Americans, they actually agree with me and are nodding their heads until minute 45. And minute 45 of the talk is when I say, well, since we all agree that students are wasting their time, right, and the stuff that they're learning, they'll never need to know in real life, right, and they don't even learn it very well in any case, right, and they don't apply it well, right. So therefore, let's stop spending money on the part that doesn't deliver the goods. Like, what, are you crazy? That's the reaction that I get. So, I mean, it is quite striking how as long as people are just reflecting on their own experience and giving them a guided tour through their own memories of what school was like, I get almost no pushback at all. Virtually everyone says, obviously, is there anyone so foolish as to deny this? And then it's when I said, well, you agree it's a waste of money, right? Well, how about we stop wasting the money? Like, what? We can't stop wasting the money. That's a very important waste that we're doing.
Because you've been in academia for your whole life, no?
Yeah, so I haven't been out of school since I was 5 years old.
Are you being held back, or are you?
Well, I just switched sides from student to teacher.
One day they didn't notice that you just changed desks.
I mean, really, that's just how it works.
Yeah.
It's just a new group of people. So, yeah, I showed as a professor. I was 26, so still there was some confusion. Many people thought I was still a student, but I am a professor
now. That was last year.
All right. Fine.
So, so you writing a book about how you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. It's like insert great analogy here. I mean,
bite the hand that feeds you.
Yeah, it is definitely like that. So, but surely you're also saying educate people what, like if they're plumbers, if they're going to be a plumber, give them the plumbing education. You can't argue that that's wasted.
Right. So again, I mean, I definitely don't say that all education is wasted. What I say is that a very high percentage of it is wasted. And again, most obviously because I would say a majority of what people learn in school is obviously, foreseeably, never going to come up in real life for almost any students.
Even your class?
Honestly, like I would like to imagine that what I'm teaching the students is going to be super useful in real life. But yeah, I mean, the kind of subjects that I teach are going to be useful in real life for future professors. People are going to work in think tanks. But again, for most people, it's of very little use to them. And of course, most of them will forget it anyway. But like understanding the economics of education, who really needs to understand the economics of education in real life? So you might say, well, professors who work in education, people work in think tanks, policymakers. But again, in real life, it doesn't come up. It comes up very rarely anyway. So, you might say, well, why don't you teach something useful? It's like, well, given that it's a class on the economics of education, I would just have to go and teach a different subject in order to transform it into something that is highly practical. So that's just not what I was hired to do.
No.
Honestly, I'll say, like, I enjoy course teaching these subjects. I am a intellectual at heart, and yet I also want to be an honest enough intellectual to admit that what I'm teaching is not something that is actually going to come up in real life very often for more than a handful of students.
No, well, I guess that's the same with many things in academia, no? I mean...
Yeah, well, almost all.
So, did you get a good reaction among colleagues, or just out of interest?
Right. So, I mean, among my immediate colleagues, I would say that there was already a moderate amount of sympathy for the view, and there were several that were skeptical that I won over. And then there were others that were skeptical who just said, nope, you're wrong. You're right. Or at least, well, like, you may be right in some sense, but in a deeper sense, you're wrong. Now, out of the broader economics profession, there is actually a quite divided reaction. So out of economists who heard the argument but did not specialize in education and labor economics, they generally said, yes, of course. Isn't that what people already think? It's like, no. And on the other hand, out of people who specialize in education and labor economics, i.e. the people who actually know the most about this research, they're the ones that were generally not convinced. Now, this obviously weighs on me and troubles me. Well, so I can convince the people that know economics in general but don't actually know a lot about this particular topic, but I failed to convince the people that know a lot about the particular topic. And again, my answer there is, I just think that the economists working in this area are very dogmatic. They are the opposite of interdisciplinary. They only want to hear evidence from within not only the economics, but within their subfield of economics. And their attitude is such where they're really looking for a reason to reject as soon as they can and then move on. So, for example, there was a new paper that came out around the same time as my book about the Harvard of Columbia. So whatever, I don't remember the name, but whatever school is the Harvard of the nation of Columbia. There's a new paper about this school and how this school had gone and changed its curriculum for economics and business, and then something happened. All right, now I read the paper. It's a good paper, but there were people basically taking the paper and waving it around in my face saying, this paper shows you're wrong, Brian. You're like, one paper can't show I'm wrong. I mean, like, look, I've got like 1,000 citations. How can one paper possibly show more than just a tiny little marginal amount? First point. And, but this is their mentality of whatever the latest high-tech paper says is the truth, as long as it's what they believed all along. Right? Because I said, look, what if this paper come out the other way? Would you then be saying that this is the paper proves Brian's right? No, you wouldn't. We all know that you wouldn't be saying this one paper disproves our entire way of thinking. So really what's going on is that you reject the general approach. And it's not even that closely tied to the research. It's more along the lines of, it just seems this way to me. And then the research, to a great degree, rationalizes the initial view.
You're destroying my faith in economics here. And economics.
Yeah. So again, of course, you can say that a lot of other fields are worse.
Yeah.
Right. And, at least I'm able to get this work published and get people talking about it.
Yeah.
And people did not bite my head off. I would say, I don't think there was a single economist who just freaked out at me. No one tried to cancel me or anything. No one said Princeton University Press should be ashamed that they did this. Maybe we should boycott the press. So there's none of that nonsense. But rather, like the main reaction from specialists is just deafening silence. So I got a lot of attention for this in many different fields, but the people specializing in it just didn't do it. And again, you might say, well, this is an article field. They don't even really write or read books. It's like, well, all right, that's kind of a crummy attitude. Say, well, I mean, it's a book about the area I specialize in. Well, we don't write books, so I'm not going to read it. Like, come on, man.
That's strange. I mean, I'm an Englishman living here in Italy, and so what do I know about American academia? And but my last guest, who I'm still working on the song about, was Peter Bogassian from. Have you heard of him?
The name is really familiar, but I don't remember.
He's another professor. He says the regressive left has taken over the academy, and so have you any experience of that about the woke is the word that they use a lot?
Right. Yeah. So academia has been very leftist for as long as I can remember. So there were brainwashing sessions back in 1989 when I was an undergraduate. DARE, Diversity, Awareness, the Resources of Education. And the education is not real education. It's just some people with using subtly veiled intimidation to make you agree with their secular religion. So this has been going on for as long as I can remember. I would say there was a lull. So I'd say there's a period from around the mid-90s to around 2010 where even though academia remained very leftist, but there just wasn't a lot of activism. There wasn't a lot of effort to breathe down your neck and freak out at you. And then, about 10 years ago, we began a fundamentalist revival. And again, I think that analogy, the fundamentalist revival, is apt. Okay. So when you read about previous religious revivals in the history of Christianity, it's not like they just found Christianity. It's that there's this cultural force of Christianity that's around the whole time, but decades can go when people are like, yeah, we're Christian, whatever. And then after some decades of people being fairly apathetic, there's some people say, wait a second, this is our faith. This is what gives life meaning. This is what we believe in. How can we just be sitting there paying it lip service? We should devote our entire lives to these absurd dogmas. Right? And that's the way that religious revivals have worked in the history of Christianity and presumably every other religion. Right? And that's what's going on right now with academic leftism. The religion has been around for like many decades, but there are periods when people are relatively apathetic about it. And yes, we're academic leftists, of course. Yes, all of these things are right, but I'm not going to worry about it too much. I'm much more interested in going and getting a job and making some money and having fun and pursuing my career. And then you get a situation where you have older people like this, and there's some young people come along and say, hey, you say you believe in these great verities, but woe unto you, woe unto those who are the hypocrites and the sinners and the fornicators and that kind of thing, except it's the left-wing fanatic version of that sermon instead of the classical Christian one or the classical Jewish one that you can get out of the prophets of the Bible, right? And so that's what's been going on for the last 10 years. And just like with the religious movement, there's the effort to go and hunt down the apostate, the person who's committed a very minor affront against the ethos of the group. So, the heretic's worse than the infidel most of the time, right? This is a classic observation about religion, and you can definitely see this in academic leftism. Most of the actual victims of canceling within academia are themselves leftists because there just aren't enough non-leftists to freak out at. They could freak out at all the non-leftists in academia, and then they're like, well, now who do we freak out at? Like, well, we're just going to just be done? No, we can't be done. Right? We still are really angry, and the religious revival has not spent itself yet. So let's look among our own for people that are less than 100% loyal. And we'll find their heresies, and we will expose them as right-wing roters. So, like under Mao is always looking around for capitalist roters in the Chinese Communist Party, right? And like, what are you talking about, right? And really, what it means is, well, there are some people who are less than 100% totally fanatical. There are some people within this party looking at Taiwan and Hong Kong and Macau and saying those countries have something to teach us. And I'm going to hunt down these people with these thoughts that they dare not express for fear of being murdered by me, and I'm going to murder them.
Okay.
That was what Maoist China. So academic leftists are in no position to be murdering anyone. And I don't think that they are the kind of people that would. I think that they're actually not made of steel like Mao or Stalin. But they would, of course, get you fired and just get you flung out of the academic community. So I think that's about the limit of where they would go. They're just, of course, these are people that live in peaceful countries where they don't see blood flow. They probably faint at the sight of blood, and that's a good thing, right? You should faint at the sight of blood. Flowing blood's a terrible thing, right? We need, if the whole world were full of people that faint at the sight of blood, it would be a much better world. But, however, the metaphorical blood of just getting somebody fired and removed from academia and ostracized, of course, the left-wing revival is very big on that. In terms of how it's affected me personally, so far nothing bad's ever happened to me.
Okay.
I've had some friends that have been treated quite shamefully, and that upsets me in some ways more than if it happened to myself. Because I have friends who are just totally sweet, innocent people who just aren't very good at figuring out what will upset other people, and people jump on them and assume the worst of them, and that's very distressing to me that they would treat my friends so shamefully.
Well, it's interesting what you say about the second wave being worse. I'm sure there's a theory in that, and also what you said about turning on their own, because Peter Bogassian is an atheist professor. He teaches atheism, so you can't get more secular left than that. So, but he did provoke them with writing, getting up fake articles about showing how easy it is, and they also call it idea laundering. How you set up your own journal, and you publish all your friends' articles about this, and then you reference the source being your own journal. But yeah, he was very. I mean, he lives in Portland, so he lives in Portland, and he's he's really at the cusp of it. If you show any sign of of any sort of, what should I say, pressure, trying to press us, or any sort of judgment on anyone else, you can get swastika carved in your door and a bag of shit left on your back door, and.
Yeah, so nothing like that's ever happened to me. I've had people angry at me on social media, but
you could be on the list.
So when my education book came out, I did get a call from an administrator at Mason, and I'm like, so it begins. Right, so finally, there's going to be some pushback. But actually, she just wanted to come and talk to me and say, well, what do you think we could do to improve things? So she was actually totally nice. And,
I sense you're disappointed,
Brian. I don't think she listened to a thing I said, but so definitely didn't implement anything that I said. But it was perfectly civil, and I had no complaints about the experience.
You're not disappointed?
So, yeah, I mean, of course, like my dream is that people hear it and say, this is a great book, I'm persuaded.
Yeah.
Honestly, I don't write anything to upset anyone. That is absolutely not my goal. Many people think I do. They say, well, the only reason you would write this is just to upset people and to troll them. Like, look, I don't need to make up stuff to upset and then argue for it. Like what I sincerely believe is upsetting enough, and you could tell me a way to say what I think is true in a more persuasive and palatable manner, I'm very interested to learn that. I don't want to alienate people. I just want everyone to read it and say, right, I understand what you're saying. You listened to me. You've been responsive, and here's some questions, and then again, of course, my dream is at the end to say, "Yeah, I'm convinced.
Yeah,
you're right." And I say, I honestly, I don't think about people who disagree with me as enemies or anything like that. So like my dream is just to change people's minds and be friends.
Yeah.
Really.
So what's the have you? Are you going to this Keyhole Solutions? Moving back to your song. Is that going to be your next project? Are you working on a book about that? Or?
No, so that's a chapter in the Open Borders book.
Oh, okay.
The chapter in the Open Borders book. So it's just something that I thought would lend itself to a song format, because you could have 4 stanzas, each on one complaint.
Okay. What are the 4 complaints?
There's the poverty, there's the fiscal burden, there's the cultural harm, and there's the political harm.
Okay.
Right, and again, if you get Open Borders, then I go through exactly those 4 complaints.
Right.
So the previous 4 chapters, there's a chapter on each of those complaints. Chapters 2 through 5 each deal with one of those 4 complaints, and then the Keyhole Solution chapter says, all right, fine. So you think that these problems are more severe than I have claimed? Well, here's a cheaper, more humane way of handling the problems than kick them out and keep them out.
Great. Wow, this is so good. Wish all my guests were like you. They put, the four stanzas.
Well, I love so like one of my I often quote Johannes Brahms. He had this line saying, I am in love music. I in love with music. I love music. I think of nothing but music and think of something else only when it makes music more beautiful to me. Right. And so I love that quote. It's translated a few different ways, but anyway, that's the translation that I really like. And yeah, so like I'm a huge classical and opera person, but I also love rock, punk. I do a lot of karaoke for fun. So I really there's like almost no genre of music that I don't enjoy, right? So probably like atonal classical then has to be at the very top. So
don't expect that.
Little bit of Schoenberg I like. Shostakovich I love.
All right. Let's bring down the bar a little bit. I mean, I have a guitar. Don't expect symphonic.
I love folk songs. I love hippie music.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's this movie called Stuck in Love, which has a fantastic soundtrack. Right, and most of it, what I think of as hippie music. So I like that one a lot.
Okay, I'll try that.
Let's see. So there's a couple of other, so there's, I went and saw the Gypsy Kings perform a while back.
Oh, wow.
And the opening act was called Elijah and the Moon.
Okay.
And I love him, actually. So I'd never heard of him, and he did these opening act, and I went and got his albums, and I played those a lot. Again, it's very hippie stuff. And then there's another guy named Jeremy Messersmith, who also sort of like guitar hippie music, which again I enjoy quite a lot. And I got my daughter and my niece singing along to some of the songs, so
that's great.
Good stuff.
I try and rip off artists as much as possible because I'm doing three episodes a week, so 156 songs a year, so I need a lot of material. Yeah. So I'll definitely just.
So I'm a huge fan of Bad Religion, like atheist punk rock band.
Okay. So
there I know like all their stuff, and I karaoke their stuff a lot too.
All right. Well, that's enough. I don't think I'll be able to get them all in, but we definitely have done all types of music like reggae, rock, folk. So fantastic. Do you think you can apply that Keyhole solutions to all types of?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, so like some of the earlier versions are you go and you look at how countries usually deal with pollution.
Yeah.
And it's to write a phone book of regulations.
Yeah.
And that gives you, it's very expensive to follow that phone book of regulations. And very often there'll be a very expensive regulation to follow that actually only cleans the air a very small amount. On the other hand, there will be things that people could do that would give you a very large amount of cleanup at low cost, but it's not, but the rules the rules allow it. And so people keep doing it. So again, they're like something economists have been saying for decades is just put a tax, just say pay $30 a ton and you can do as much as little as you want. Now, then there's this crazy idea that people would then just pay the tax and pollute enormously, which describes business in no other area.
Yeah.
There's no other way in which you raise the price of a business input in business just says, great, I'll just continue buying just as much as before and pay an enormous price. Instead, when you make something expensive to business, standard procedures to say, can we cut back on this? How can we cut back on this? Is there any other way of doing it? That's where we could avoid paying it. And again, if you were to tax pollution, this would set off not only a great search for what are the cheapest ways to go and cut back, but also would create an industry of pollution reduction innovation. Right now, the main thing that happens if you come up with a new kind of pollution regulation is you try to get the government to go and impose it so everyone has to buy it. But then industry is fighting it the whole way because we don't want to have more rules. On the other hand, if you just hit a fixed tax for pollution, and then anyone who came up with an innovation that let you reduce your pollution at a low cost, industry would then rush to go and buy the innovation because they'd save money and they wouldn't need to have this regulatory lag where you argue about whether to go and require it. So again, it's a very sensible approach to dealing with regulation. And when economists have tried to measure the cost savings, standard estimate you can get out of a very liberal economist like Alan Blinder is that doing it this way would give you the same level of pollution at about half the cost, or you could get double the pollution reduction at the same cost. but all that requires is that people stop being so stubborn. Stop saying no compromise and you shouldn't be able to pay to do this, and just relax. So Alan Blinder's this line where there are people say you just shouldn't be able to pollute at all, and Alan Blinder says, to think this is not to think, because all human activities have some pollution. So it would kill humanity to actually say no pollution at all. You got to allow some. But then the question is, how can we get it down to a comfortable level at a reasonable cost? So that's another case of a Keyhole solution. But I mean, really, for almost any, like just go to a law library and look at the phone books of regulation, and for each one say, isn't there something that we could do that would just change incentives, and then we could burn the book?
Yeah, that's great. I just interviewed Emily Atkins from the Atkins, who does a heated newsletter about global warming, and she was complaining about all the lobbyists and how it's impossible to do anything like that. But does a taxation apply to that as well, or is that much easier?
Well, yeah, of course. This is what economists have been saying for decades. It's just tax carbon, right? And again, and then you can toggle the tax up or down based upon what's happening. I mean, like global warming is a case where I think there's a much cheaper solution than the tax, and that is what's called geoengineering, where you just go and put moderate amounts of sulfur into the atmosphere, and then to increase the reflectivity of the Earth. So, I mean, I've talked to multiple people who seem very sober on this, and they say, "Yeah, it sure looks like this would work at like a minuscule fraction of the cost of anything else." Again, probably what's really going to happen is that we're just going to flounder around wasting enormous amounts of money on token reductions in carbon, but still, like the amount that goes out will be enormous, and then things will start to get uncomfortably hot, and then finally we'll paint ourselves in a corner where we have to do the thing that actually makes sense. So that's my forecast for 100 years from now, say. But
it seems crazy because generating billions of dollars in taxation revenue would solve a lot of these problems. But is it not hard?
Yeah, I mean, that would be much more reasonable than the regulations that we have. But again, it just goes against the desire to go and boss people around and micromanage them, right? And so that's a great deal of what's going on. Is just you have activists who have a lot, who have a lot of commitment, but they're just not calm enough to really weigh what is the cheapest way that we can get this thing done. And then on the other hand, you just have a lot of apathy of people to say, yeah, whatever. And then there's piles of nonsense of, well, industry should pay the whole cost, not consumers. Like, well, how do you plan to do that? How do you plan to? So your plan is somehow you're going to get the amount of gasoline that people are using down, but it's all the cost will be borne by industry. It's nonsense.
No, but
so back in 2009, Obama had some speech saying that we want the price of gas should stay the same, but we should reduce pollution. It's like, well, how's that going to happen? People are going to keep driving as long as the cost stays the same. So again, it's basically just demagoguery of those fat cats over there should bear the whole burden. And it's like, yeah, but when you put the burden on them, will that reduce supply and raise the price anyway? So the burden actually winds up getting shared. And it's like, do not look behind that curtain. Do not look behind that curtain.
But doesn't one of the things she was saying is that they're like plastic bottles, go recycling them. 80% of the pollution, or even more than that, comes from actually manufacturing in the manufacturing process. And if you reduce that, then everything else is just a smokescreen. The recycling.
Yeah, quite possibly. I don't know anything about the facts of that, but again, so if there were a tax on the production of the new bottles, then of course there's a bigger incentive to go and recycle the old ones.
Yeah, that's a great thing about economics, though. It does, from what I remember when I studied it, which is it's a long time ago, and obviously I've forgotten everything as you so clearly point out. But it does have these simple solutions for everything. If you just tackle them.
Yeah, not always, but you take what you can get. So whenever someone's complaining, there's a classic comeback like, well, if you've got a better idea, I'd love for you to share it with the group. And at least half the time, economists do have a better idea. We're not just complaining. We're saying, yeah, I've got a better idea. just hear me out, man. Don't bite my head off. Don't start calling me a neoliberal shill. Just listen to what I have to say. You dial down the emotion. I was just teaching my son some math, and he's getting upset. And I say, look, when you're doing math, it doesn't do any good to get upset. Like being angry doesn't make the math go better. Makes it worse. Being sad, being irritated. The only emotion that goes with math is being calm, right? And he's getting flustered, and I'm saying, look, am I mad at you, son? I'm not mad at you. I'm totally calm, and I want you to be totally calm, because when we're totally calm, our mathematical performance is at its peak. And I say the same thing for policy design. When you're totally calm, that's when you are best able to craft a policy that deals with problems at a reasonable cost.
Yeah. Don't you think you should go into public service or something like that, or work in the? Because that sounds like, academia sounds pretty tranquil anyway. You're not needed there. You might be more needed in where people hot under the.
I'm just the kind of person that people who are making policy wouldn't want to have around. And if they ever came to me and said we want some advice, I'd be happy to advise them. But I'm not the kind of person that would fit in based upon everything that I've heard.
Yeah.
Again, of course, a lot of what you do there is demagogue it. So you say this, we don't want to hear a calm solution. We want to hear a crazy soundbite.
Yeah.
That's not. I'm not in the business of doing crazy sound bites. I'm trying to dial down the emotion in the conversation to the lowest possible level, where we can go and have a fruitful exchange of ideas.
That sounds beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
We need more people.
I can't tell how many times people have bitten my head off for saying, "Let's calm down." Here's the thing. Even just the saying "calm down" is something that you have to think the right way to say "calm down." Right? And obviously, will you idiots calm down? Not a constructive way of going forward. But a lot of times, your best path is not even to say "calm down." It's just try to lead by example, right? And when other people are upset, you just be calm and hope that they get the message.
Sure.
Because otherwise, they may say, "Don't tell me to calm down." All right, I can issue a complete and utter retraction. How foolish of me to ask you to calm down. I'll never make such an unreasonable demand again, as long as I live. I earnestly apologize for asking you to calm down.
Wow. You should be in crisis resolution or something like that.
I'm a big fan of the Dale Carnegie classic, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And not because I think I'm naturally great at any of this stuff. I think I'm naturally bad. But at least I've got self-awareness of my own flaws. And I have worked hard to try to get past them. When I was 18, I was just a model of unpersuasive communication. I think about the number of times as a kid I told people, "When will you get it through your thick skull?" Go back in time. Look, do you think that's likely to change their minds when you point out their thick skulls, young Bryan? No. Then why did you say it? Because it felt good to insult them because they made me angry. Well, wouldn't you like to actually persuade someone? Well, I guess. Can't I do both? Probably not.
Okay, that's great. I also wanted to ask you about, because I heard you had a bet about Brexit. Is that right?
Yes.
Being British.
It's the bet that lost me the very most sleep.
Okay.
Yes.
You want to go into that?
Yes. So, Canadian author and radio personality Mark Steyn. I don't know if you know about him. He's quite famous. I think he fills in for Rush Limbaugh, who's enormously famous radio personality here. In any case, he had a book, I believe, called America Alone, where written, I think it's around 2005, but anyway, there's a part where he says that the EU is on the verge of collapse, it's imminent, and I read this and I publicly offered to bet, and I read the book in 2010, and what I said is I will bet you that 0 countries in the European Union, I think about 2008, So I said, so let's see, was it 2000? I think it was. Yes. So, so I said 0 countries that are currently in the European Union, the population's over 10 million, will leave within the next 10 years. All right. So first there was Greece, and I was looking like, is this guy going to, and again, of course, so he did accept the bet. Right now, of course, I offered terms that were extremely favorable relative to what he said.
Okay.
Because he said the whole thing was going to collapse in a few years, and I said there won't be a single notable country that will leave within 10 years.
That's good odds. I take.
Okay. So I think we did it even odds, and he said yes, right? And then what happened was that there was Greece, and I'm like, Greece, what's the population of Greece? It's like 10.01 million. All right. Anyway, that faded away. But then Brexit happened, right? And the day after Brexit happened, there were a lot of people saying, pay up the money, chump. And I said, look, the bet said it must officially leave. It didn't say that it did not say that there will be a non-binding referendum. It said it's got to say officially leave. And so I said, yeah, well, probably I'm going to lose now, but let's just wait and see what happens. And then, as you know, there were multiple extensions, multiple delays, and it really was down to the wire. Right, and then finally there was one last delay that put me over the top. Right, and now people said, did you see that this exact scenario was coming? I said, no, I didn't see this exact scenario was coming. What I did foresee was that if any country was seemed like it was going to leave, there would be multiple different ways that it might get derailed, and even if it did happen in the end, there'd be multiple delays. So that really was part of my thinking, is that any major change will lead to some kind of drag. And so that's what made that time horizon, what I thought made that time horizon safe. So I did win, but I won by the skin of my teeth. So I'm not going to say that I crushed my opponent or anything like that. I will say that I crushed him relative to what he originally wrote.
Okay.
Because right in 2005, this thing is going to collapse in a year now. And then 15 years later, one country leaves. That's not vindication. That is a pale shadow of what you said happening. So
that's very good of you to say that. I heard that most people who win a bet will never. Well, they say they lost it because of. Yes. They never say they won it.
Oh yeah. Mark Stein, by the way, to his credit, so while he did claim victory right after the Brexit vote, then he actually did concede defeat after when Brexit took too long. There were a bunch of people saying, no, the spirit of the bet, there's no such thing as the spirit of the bet. There's the literal words of the bet. That's why we work out an exact statement of what the bet is. Now, this was particularly important for me personally because at the time of the Brexit bet, I had a perfect betting record. And I really didn't want this to be the one that I lost on. I would rather lose to a close friend rather than someone that I thought was shooting his mouth off excessively. Actually, as it stands right now, I'm still have a perfect record, so I'm at 21-0, I believe. And at January 30th, I'm going to win bet number 22 because I bet back in 2016 that Trump would serve a full term, and unless he resigns or gets shot or drops dead of a heart attack or long COVID or whatever, I win.
Okay, wow, that's any others running?
Let's see. I've got actually a wiki where I list all of my bets, so I do have a bunch going on. I've got one on the population here, like the total fertility rate in India as of 2030, that I'm totally on track to win. So basically, I made that bet back when I I think it's like in 2010. I made a bet with a colleague that I think in 2030 that India's total fertility rate would be down to 2.0, and I think India was then still at 3. And so the colleague said, no, it's going to stop before then. And now, just 10 years in, it's fallen from 3 to 2.2. So I've got 10 more years to do the last 0.2, and then I win.
That's fascinating. So all these geopolitical.
Yeah. And I don't just bet things that I want to happen. I bet what I think is going to happen. Right. And to a large degree, I bet people just when I think they're shooting their mouths off and they're just making extravagant, hyperbolic, overconfident claims. And I want to clear the air. And of course, most of the time when you offer to bet someone, they just run for the hills.
But
eek, I'll bet.
But do people come to you for bets? Do people offer you?
Very rarely. Normally, people say things that I think are silly, and then I challenge them. once in a while I'll say something and someone will email me, and then sometimes what I'll do is I will just publicly propose a bet, and then I'll hunt for anyone on earth willing to take the bet. Mm-hmm. So actually back in 2009, for the first time in many decades, the U.S. unemployment rate surpassed the EU unemployment rate in March 2009. And then there were a bunch of apologists for European labor market regulation who leaped out of the woodwork to say, see, it's a total myth that European labor regulation has caused any unemployment. Don't believe any of that nonsense, just a bunch of right-wing ideology. And then I said, all right, well, of course, it's just 1 month after many decades of, but anyway, say, look, but the whole theory of the blaming labor market regulation is to say that labor markets in less regulated countries, unemployment is allowed to move more freely, but it also comes down more quickly. Mm-hmm. So actually what we're seeing is exactly what my story predicts, namely that when there's a downturn, unemployment will rise more quickly in countries like the U.S. with lower labor market regulation, but then will fall more quickly and will go back down to a lower level than the European norm. So anyway, I publicly offered to do a bet over the average unemployment rates over the next 10 years in the U.S. versus the EU. And it was almost impossible to get anyone to take that bet. But I did find one Australian economist who took it. Okay. I found one Australian economist who took that bet. And again, when we took it, I think U.S. unemployment rate was maybe like 2 percentage points over the European. And to get him to bet, I think I had to spot him by a full 2 percentage points. So basically, I started off, I think, 4 percentage points in the hole. Right? But it took after about 7 years, he just conceded.
It's a long time. It's quite amusing.
Well, meaning it did take a while because remember it was an average over the course of that decade. Sure. So I knew I would be in the hole for a year or two, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then I was just counting on the U.S. rebounding, and actually not only did the U.S. rebound, the U.S. rebounded to the lowest unemployment rate in my entire lifetime. Right, I'm almost 50, so U.S. unemployment rate. As basically about a year ago, U.S. unemployment rate was lower than it had ever been in my entire life. It was below 4%. And then, of course, COVID destroyed all of that.
Yeah. But didn't see that one coming, did we? That's kind of all bets off. Of course, you can just see, well, something bad will happen eventually, but as to what the bad thing is. And once you start making a list of bad things that can happen eventually, COVID's not even that bad. No.
Right? It could be a plague with 10 times the fatality rate. There are such diseases, sure. Right? And could be World War III, nuclear weapons. There's a bunch of things that are way worse that could have happened. So it's like, gee, right? Of course, we can hope things stay okay, but like odds that different bad things happen over the course of a century.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. One thing before I let you go, just to wrap it up, I like to ask the guests about spirituality because I'm a student of metaphysics, and some of my other guests are like Rupert Sheldrake, and about the. I don't know who that is. It's saying that consciousness makes matter rather than matter makes consciousness. So, and I've heard you discussing that with some physicist colleagues. That physicists say everything they can explain everything, but you say that they can't explain pain and things like that. They can't. Yeah. So where do you stand on spirituality and reincarnation and things like that?
Yeah. So the idea that consciousness makes matter, that there's life after death, that seems to me like wishful thinking. But on the other hand, the idea that there are many important phenomena in the world that physicists have just totally failed to even try to explain, I think that's obvious. So the number of times physicists said, "Oh, well, we've explained pain. All right, show me the part of the physics textbook that says that I will experience pain." And they said, "Well, it's implied." No, it's not. There's nothing in there that says that there will even be consciousness.
Yeah.
You could say that we could use physics to go and design something like a thermostat, where when the temperature is too low, it shuts off, and when it's too high, it turns on. But that's different from the thermostat thinks that it is too hot or thinks that it's too cold. Right? So as a student of philosopher John Searle, and he actually did have an argument with, I can't remember, I think it was Daniel Dennett. Yeah, I think it was Daniel Dennett, actually. This is a debate from 35 years ago, where, as I recall the story, so this is all from memory from 30 years ago, so my apologies if I'm getting it wrong, but Searle versus Dennett, And then it says, even a device as simple as a thermostat has beliefs. And then Stroll says, what beliefs does your thermostat have? And then it says, it has the beliefs that it's too hot in here, it's too cold in here, and it's just right in here. It's like, all right, fine. Does a mercury thermometer have beliefs? Does it have the belief that my temperature is 98.6? Look, it's just lines on a piece of glass and some mercury inside and external conditions that means it has beliefs in the same sense that I have a belief. It's just crazy. So I am strongly what philosophers call a dualist, where I just say that there are two very different kinds of things in the universe. There are physical things and there are mental things, right? And it is not hard to list mental things. So, thoughts, beliefs, feelings, emotions, right? All of these things are mental things. Now, I'm happy to say that there is a strong connection between the mental and the physical worlds. So, yeah, you can go and give me brain damage. You can shoot me. Shooting me in the head might just kill me, and then I won't have any beliefs or feelings at all. But you could go and do a brain operation on me so that I will be lobotomized, and then I will, or you can even remove a part of my brain, and then I won't. There's a bunch of things I won't be able to do anymore. Right. So in that case, you can say, well, so the physical world has changed the mental world. Right, and a lot of evidence for that. I mean, just putting someone in a room where they are sleep deprived, and then their math performance is worse. So there's a connection between the physical and the mental worlds. But nevertheless, there is nothing about any theory in physics that implies that I will feel pain, that implies that I will have beliefs. And again, this is really obvious when you think about what is a truism, but it's one that sounds obvious, but when you think about it, it's profound. And this is, you would never suspect that anyone else had beliefs unless you had them.
Yeah.
You would never suspect that anyone else had beliefs unless you had them. Right. Well, of course, now it's like, well, what are you talking about? They're like, well, I mean, even saying that, you would, that's you wouldn't suspect it unless you had beliefs. Well, of course you have beliefs because you're the one making the statement. But again, this gets down to this classic problem of other minds. How do you know that other people have minds? How do you know that other people feel pain? It's like, well, the one thing I'm sure of is that I have beliefs and I feel pain. This goes back to Descartes, cogito ergo sum. When people say, all of this is speculation, this is not speculation. The fact that I have beliefs, I know more with greater certainty than I know the physical world even exists. I could not possibly be wrong about myself having beliefs or being in pain. I mean, if I'm feeling pain, that's by definition I'm in pain. I can't be wrong about that. I'm infallible on me immediately having beliefs, immediately having pain. I could not possibly be wrong on that. Anything in the physics books, I could easily be wrong on, and probably would be. Right. Right. So, and then once you realize, right, so all this fundamental core understanding of the mental world, it comes from introspection, which again is something that physicists just don't study at all. They don't study introspection. Even psychologists, you could say, well, they go and ask you about your introspection, but that's not the same as the introspection itself. That's something that only you can experience unless you have the superpower of mind reading, right? So you can write a comic book story where someone has mind reading, right? But I don't have it. Right, so I can imagine being able to actually just sense your thoughts, but really it's all inferential. I look at your behavior and I infer your thoughts. But the only reason I'm tempted to infer that you have any thoughts is because I know I've got them, and you seem like the same kind of creature as me biologically. So this is why I also think that it's crazy to think that a computer thinks. Look, it doesn't matter what the output is. It could go and have a interactive copy of me. But once I understand that it's just someone that programmed it to go and do certain things when certain inputs happen, then I think, okay, so it's not the inner workings are not the same. And again, this is a standard trope in science fiction where you think that you're talking to a real person and then you open them up and you see it's just a bunch of cogs inside. You say, it's not the kind of thing that I would think would lead to having a mental state. Yeah. Whereas on the other hand, if you open up a machine and see that it's got a biological brain in there, then it's like, maybe it is really thinking.
But, you cut up a brain and it doesn't look like those cells can create consciousness. I mean...
That's right. I mean, that's one where you'd have to go and show someone an X-ray of their own head and say, look, it's got the same kind of stuff in your head that you got in your head. Or, he's got the same stuff in his head that you got in your head. And furthermore, we can go and show experiments or medical accidents where parts of brain are removed, and then we can see that the behavior changed. And of course, you could always say, well, maybe when you remove that part of the brain, people just don't feel like talking anymore, but they're still capable of doing it. It's like, I guess that's possible, but that seems super unlikely. Like, under what circumstances would I decide to just stop talking to people forever? Right? It seems unlikely. So anyway, now, of course, all of this is just about consciousness rather than something harder like free will, which I also just say, look, if you tell me that you've got science showing that my free will isn't real, look, but I observe my free will all the time. It is I directly observe it. You can say, yes, well, you think you observe it, but it's an illusion. Like, well, if that's an illusion, why couldn't the physical world be an illusion too? So if we're just going to go and throw aside not just one observation a lifetime, but throw away my constant observations, then I say that we are at the end of science, because science is not about throwing out observations. It's about coming up with theories that explain the observations.
Okay.
So, I'd say introspection convinces me of not only that I am conscious, but that I have free will. For other people, I can't have that same kind of certainty, but it just seems super unlikely to me that a creature that seems to be built the same way as me and acts the same way as me, nevertheless is actually just hollow inside and doesn't have any mental states. But without mind reading, I can never know with absolute certainty. But what I can know with absolute certainty is that I feel pain, I have thoughts. Free will, I'll say that that's something where it's more complicated. I wouldn't claim absolute certainty for that, but still very high certainty.
But if you've done this introspection, you thought, the what am I? So if I chop Bryan's hand off, you're still there. No, if I chop your arm off and your leg, how much chopping do I have to do? How much, until you stop? Can you imagine yourself not being there? Do you really think?
Yeah, well, so I'd say, definitely, if you go and damage my brain, then a lot of me goes away.
But maybe you just stop. You stop in this incarnation because the mind made the body, not the body made the mind.
Well, think about this. So suppose that I just I lose the ability to speak, but I could still do sign language, for example. Mm-hmm. Right? I would say that actually again, you could say, well, your ability to speak still is there, but it's in another dimension or something. And I say, that just sounds silly. But it seems like you actually have gone and reduced my you've destroyed a mental ability by damaging my brain. And then if you can go and damage some of my mental abilities by damaging some of my brain, then it seems very hard to escape the conclusion that if you just destroyed my brain, then my mental states would just cease to exist.
That's like saying, you're driving in a car and somebody pulls the wheel off, or somebody pulls the other wheel off, but you're still inside the car, they did.
Right. Yeah. So again, I would also say that it's not like as long as you're just removing limbs, just to be morbid about this.
What about take out the engine? Let's take out the engine.
Yes. Yeah. So you take out the engine. It's like, well, can the car still drive? Like, no, the car can't drive at all anymore.
No, but there's still a driver.
There's still a driver, but the car doesn't. But the car no longer. But I say the car no longer is capable of driving. Right. So,
because there's been lots of studies into reincarnation, and there is, the University of Virginia has the Perpetual Studies Institute, and there are lots of cases of reincarnation.
I could be wrong, but I'll also say I'm ultra skeptical. It would take something close to a miracle to change my mind on reincarnation. It would
but there have been studies. There is data available on that.
Right. So I'm unfamiliar with it. The kind of thing it would take to change my mind would be if you've seen the movie Ghosts with Patrick Swayze, Demi Moore. So there, you actually have the ghost communicating with his girlfriend through the medium. And again, it's does the ghost know things that no one else could possibly know? And in the movie, they said they set it up. Was like, all right, if that happened to me, I would at least be thinking maybe, but it would have to be.
But apply that criteria to other things you read in science magazines, and how your belief is. If enough people have given a testimony, you accept it. But then for this thing, you apply. It must happen to me as a first person.
So it wouldn't have to happen to me as a first person, but also if there's someone that I thought was ironclad trust in their in their skepticism, and they said this happened to me, and this actually happened to me, then again, that would shake my confidence. But it'd have to be someone that I already had enormous trust in, because I just think people are unreliable and prone to wishful thinking. So, like there's been research on the fraction of people who think that they've been abducted by aliens. It's high, right? And I think, and yet when I have seen people like this interviewed, what they say just doesn't add up. Just seems more like that wishful thinking and like, well, I was in a dream, but then the alien woke me up, and like, well, couldn't you just have been in the dream for the whole time? Maybe doesn't that seem like a better story?
Yeah.
To me, that makes more sense. Again, so like metaphysically, I don't have any hard objection to it. I just say like it just seems super unlikely. So could a tree be conscious and it just doesn't do it, and it just doesn't talk because it doesn't have a mouth? Like, I suppose, but it seems again extraordinarily unlikely.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, great. Thanks, Bryan. Thanks for taking some time to chat to me. It's been great.
My pleasure. So be sure to send me the URL when it goes up.
I will be sure, and I'll do my more of the research into the Keyhole solutions. And
okay. All right. So and then you sing the song at the beginning of the podcast, or when do you sing it?
I like to put it at the end as sort of a...
Okay. All right. Well, I look forward to the song.
All right. Thanks, Bryan.
All right. Thank you. All right. Have a great day. All right.
You too.
Arrivederci.
Arrivederci. Ciao, ciao.
Okay, bye-bye.
Build walls around the welfare state, not a border around the country. These ideas may sound unfair, but poverty's unfairer. Keyhole solutions to open borders. Immigrants took our jobs, took our jobs, took our jobs.
Use apparatuses like taxes as practices to relax the natives by paying their taxes so their objection collapses.
Immigrants only take and they will break the welfare state.
For these purposes, make access to services purchases, so this encourages nurturers for surpluses.
What about having blue cards as well as green? Build walls around the welfare state, not a border around the country. These ideas may sound unfair, but poverty's unfairer. Keyhole solutions to open borders. They don't talk like us, they can't discuss, they can't adjust.
To address this request, I suggest a language test, which selects the best that possess the necessary linguistic finesse.
They've got bad ideas, they'll bring them here, these are our fears.
Protect from the threat from the outset by vets for citizenship, with a net to catch the criminal mindset.
Restriction of movement has given us global apartheid.
Stop immigration when you don't get causation. When your only tool's a hammer, everything looks like a nail. America had open borders till 1924. Got the tide and port, no one wanted anymore. It became the richest country in the whole wide world.
Build walls around the welfare state, not a border around the country. These ideas may sound unfair, but poverty's unfairer. Keyhole solutions to open borders.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and review it on your podcast app. If you like the song, find it on all streaming services or at podsongs.com. Thanks to my musicians Maurizio San Nicola and Massimino Vodza, and my researcher Dori Verbo. And to you, the listener, thanks for tuning in.